Bueno, la primera pregunta es, ¿cuál es el precio mínimo que atrae la explotación de no convencionales?
So the minimum price is a good question. Has to do with how much did the operator spend to obtain his lease. So in the United States, for example, the early operators in the different regions got their leases at quite low costs. So their cost of production is so shockingly low that I don't want to tell you. But they're making a lot of money. At $3 gas and $100 oil, if it's a wet deposit. A company that came in later and bought their resource at a very high price will face a larger cost because they're amortizing the investment that they had for the lease. But the production cost, the variable cost of production, is quite low. So certainly in the United States, if gas prices are $4, you could make a lot of money on this.
La siguiente pregunta es, ¿cuáles son los temas indispensables a considerar relacionados con las regiones? ¿Qué información de línea base se requiere para las regiones?
There are two separate questions there. The first is baseline information before an unconventional oil and gas operation begins, like this discussion of the water quality measurements in the neighborhood. That I would think is one area which is required. But the quantitative description of that requires more specific information than I certainly could have. I couldn't give a general rule. No general rule is possible, but some background information. You will hear from my distinguished and beloved colleague, Professor Zobach, about knowing something about the seismic characteristics of the region or area. You certainly need to, now I now turn to specific things that you should know about the activity itself. I believe you need to know about the composition and quantities of produced and flowback water, and a plan, very important for the management of that water. I'm now going to speak out of school. Letting the water just, what is it called, spill off, should not be permitted. And here I think is an area where possibly it is permitted in conventional oil and gas. I think that's correct. Is that, I hope. I'm telling you that for unconventional oil and gas, I would start off by saying it's not permitted. But therefore, you must have a plan for dealing with the water that you've injected and has now produced, both for its storage, so it doesn't leak off the storage, and then what you're going to do with it. There are air quality requirements that really come from the surface activity, plus this issue of methane leakage. This is a very brief summary of the places where I would begin.
La siguiente pregunta es, la industria afirma que la operación de hidrocarburos no convencionales no requiere una regulación adicional por ser igual a la de hidrocarburos convencionales. ¿Usted qué opina?
I have said to you today that I think that that is a poor argument for industry to put forward. For one, it does not recognize the tremendous technological difference between these two activities. And secondly, invites saying we need a common regulatory framework for both these activities, which I think introduces the possibility of significant delay while one figures out how does one adapt existing regulation, which much of the industry works at in a satisfactory manner, to these new circumstances, like completions or methane leakage. So I am very much of the view, in the United States for sure, and here I would, on the basis of my great expertise in Colombia, one day, I would say industry would be well advised to argue for a new scheme, starting simply, progressive improvement.
La siguiente pregunta es, ¿el monitoreo de agua antes de la perforación del proyecto de no convencionales se debe hacer en el acuífero superficial o en un acuífero profundo cercano al sitio del fracturamiento hidráulico?
In my view, it's a longer answer. I'm not going to, only on the surface area. That's where the risks are greatest to drinking water.
La siguiente es, ¿tiene usted conocimiento de algún caso donde se haya contaminado un acuífero por un fracturamiento en los Estados Unidos o en cualquier otra parte del mundo?
This is one of those questions, the gotcha question. EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States, took two actions last year. One in Wyoming, Pavilion, Wyoming, against a Canadian operator, Encana, saying that hydraulic methane had found its way into neighboring aquifers. The second action was taken last year in Texas, near San Antonio, help me with this, Mark, by Range, against Range, saying that there had been, because there are many, many wells near San Antonio. In both cases, the Environmental Protection Agency had to withdraw those complaints. And they were given as prominent examples of such infection. This is fracturing fluid invading. There was a case, I believe in West Virginia, in 1988, where I think there was established that a injection well, that is a well where they had injected spent use, did find its way into a neighboring aquifer. that I think extends the possibilities of documented cases for fracturingly fluid injected deeply, finding its way into neighboring aquifers. The question of accidents where there have been spills at the surface, that's a much different range. And as I say, the central focus of water quality concern is well completion and well management. There are many, many cases of significant spills at the surface.
La siguiente pregunta es, ¿puede dar ejemplos de regulación simple?
I can't, it's what works. It's what works for the environmental authorities and what the companies can do and how many activities are covered. And it's really not just an abstract technical notion. It's a matter of negotiation and depends upon your capacity for inspection and enforcement. But my point is not so much that I have a magic set of numbers for this, although I do happen to have a list that was given to me last night. But my point is they've got to get better over time.
Colombia recibe una compensación económica por la explotación del recurso natural no renovable. Así como legislación, usted sugiere que esa compensación económica deba ser diferente entre los hidrocarburos convencionales y los yacimientos no convencionales.
No, you have to help me here. Do I think that, like if you, wind or solar or geothermal, is that what you mean?
No. Digamos, en Colombia, digamos, por la explotación del recurso no renovable hay que pagar, digamos, unos, llamémoslos unos impuestos, tributos, ¿sí? Como resultado, digamos, la pregunta es si debería ser diferente el pago de esos impuestos o tributos que tienen otro nombre en Colombia, debe ser diferente para convencionales y para no convencionales.
So the question is the tax or the royalty? We can discuss that in a smaller group. It's a good question. I would go for a little discrimination here. The risks are different. You may need some money to make the regulation better. But I wouldn't do it to the point of making these uneconomical for the companies. But a small group might be able to come to an agreement. It's an interesting question.
La siguiente pregunta es, ¿cómo se delimita el área alrededor del pozo para recoger información de línea base?
Again, this is going to depend upon the specific geology. But I guess I would say, as my starting point, the radius of the largest lateral. I'm not sure that Professor Zobach would agree with that, but he actually knows more about this. But it's something like that.
Okay.
¿Hay algún ejemplo sobresaliente de diferencia entre reguladores federales y estatales? ¿Conoce usted o sabe usted si existe algún ejemplo sobresaliente de diferencias entre reguladores federales y estatales?
Here in the United States, there are thousands of examples. But I think the one which created the greatest bitterness recently are federal regulations for completions, something called green completions, which I don't know what it is. Orlando knows what it is. And the difference in the completions which were being proposed, the requirements by the Environmental Protection Agency and their reasons for it, compared to how it was being administered in different states, for example, Texas. Extremely bitter differences. Texas was right.
En su opinión, ¿por qué países como Francia y el estado de Nueva York entraron en un proceso moratorio y de prohibición?
So in the case of France, there are three reasons. First of all, the most prolific basin is called the Paris Basin. That means, unfortunately, that it's located under Paris. So that, it's a little bit, like the Stanford Basin, which Professor Zobach's going to make money on. So it's a very, so remember, all those oil and gas resources belong to the French government as opposed to the people on the surface. So only see costs and no benefits. And the third, the French have a history of being very central planning oriented. And they like to know all the answers or think they know all the answers before moving forward. I think it'll be a long time before France changes that. But eventually their Ministry of Finance will have an interest in it, and it may change. In the case of the United Kingdom, where the situation is similar with respect to ownership, but different with location, I believe that the moratorium has just been lifted. The state of New York is an ill-governed state of savages, selfish, and split between those who will do anything for a job, who live in the poor part of the state, and those fancy people who live in New York City and drink white wine and Roquefort cheese and support environment. So it's a complete, unproductive collision between those two interests. And so the governor flips and flops. But there's a tremendous amount of resources, both in the Marcellus and the Utica and New York. And I don't believe they will long keep the moratorium. But they're crazy, you can't predict them.
¿existe el riesgo, sí o no, de afectación del agua subterránea con el gas metano?
My answer to that is yes, but I don't know what the question is. You mean from the methane which came from below? I don't understand, but the answer is yes. Yes. Methane will dissolve in surface water.
Una última pregunta. ¿Usted qué piensa acerca del gas metano asociado al carbón? ¿Cuál es su potencial real de producción en los Estados Unidos?
You're now speaking about coal bed methane. Well, it already is a significant source of methane, natural gas, and it is and has been for many years, produced in the United States. But its projections for its growth are quite modest compared to these tight sands and shale gas resources that we're speaking about. Thank you very much for your kindness. Thank you.